really interesting statistics are that we've just achieved more than 5 million fibre to the home connections. We're seeing a compound annual growth of 48% increase in uptake of services. E-commerce grew in 2 years in 2020 by 600%. Meaning people are taking digital services. Of course, infrastructure sharing is phenomenal for achieving economies of scale.
Good morning. Welcome to ITWeb TV. Today we are broadcasting from the Cloud Summit in Boston. And today we are joined by Juanita Clark, who is the co-founder of Digital Cancer South Africa. Welcome.
Good morning, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Good, thanks. Juanita, let's just try and recap your message to the delegates today. You were the main speaker. What message did you carry for them?
What a privilege to be able to come to this conference today with good news.
Yeah.
Often, in South Africa, and you and I spoke about this just off camera a little bit now. South Africa has gone through a really difficult time. Mm-hmm. But the good news is that the sector is growing. In fact, it's growing faster than what was originally anticipated. And the numbers are really looking good, So... and South Africa, of course, in the greater, context of Africa, is picking up the lion's share of that growth. So a lot of opportunities, good reasons for companies to invest. We're looking forward to seeing tremendous growth in the sector over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Briefly, one of the issues that you touched with discussion was the Africa Smart Agenda. Can you just try maybe and share with us what you guys have picked up from your research, some of the stuff that you've been doing on the continent with trying to drive smart continent?
Yeah, so there's a lot happening. We are seeing more and more countries developing strategies, inter-country strategies. I think one of the areas where we are slightly concerned is that there's not enough engagement across borders between countries. So we need to see a lot more bilaterals, how we as a continent can drive digital adoption. Yeah. We are still one of the continents that's got the biggest digital divide, so it's a concern. So finding mechanisms to narrow that digital divide across the continent, to stimulate uptake, to make sure that we facilitate an ecosystem of connectivity, affordable broadband services, access to devices, and then digital literacy. These are still some of the issues that we experience, but we are seeing growth in a lot of the countries that are producing broadband strategies, and putting mechanisms, policies and procedures in place that will help accelerate the deployment of digital infrastructure and also the adoption and moving, into the, participation in the greater digital economy.
Africa is a country of more than 50 countries. And how do envisage this happen? Because obviously every region, every country, they try to have their kind of own policies, which then gives us a problem when they try to connect Africa. What do you think needs to happen?
One word, harmonization. So we have to engage across the borders. We have to lock arms as a continent and discuss standardization of policies, procedures, methodologies for the deployment of infrastructure. We are still seeing fees being charged, per meter fees for the deployment of infrastructure, and other fees, exorbitant fees, that makes it prohibitive for local companies to participate, but opens the door for big companies that can, where there's greater affordability, to pick up those lion's shares. So the higher the fees for participation are in this economy, the harder it is for local companies in local currencies to participate. So we've got to find a harmonization amongst policyholders to make sure that, it's is easily understandable. And that, of course, also drives investment into the continent.
And do you think there's some sense of maybe appetite in terms of from the regulators and different governments that we have engaged to understand how important digital is and to harmonize this kind of laws, make sure that we've got uniform in terms of regulation?
Yeah. So there's always some line that draws directly across, so there are some harmonization, but active efforts, we're unfortunately not seeing enough active efforts between governments reaching out to each other, talking about the digital divide in Africa, finding mechanisms, making it easier to deploy, less expensive, removing red tape, cumbersome processes. We'd like to see a lot more engagement. We appreciate that, it's a difficult task. There's very different conditions, in-country conditions, that governments are taking into consideration. But, for us, the digital economy poses tremendous opportunity for African governments and for African society and people to participate in. And if we don't get that right, then unfortunately we're going to fail our own people. So we have to find these mechanisms. We have to come together to solve it.
And probably some of the challenges that our regulators or the government face is the lack of understanding of how critical digital has become. Can you unpack for us some of the challenges or opportunities that you think Africa can tap into in terms of when it comes to digital?
Absolutely. Yeah. I shared some statistics this morning. There's 112 data centers in Africa. There's more than 3,400 globally. When we look at IoT, active IoT devices, in Africa, we're talking in hundreds of millions active IoT devices. Globally, we're talking about billions of active IoT devices. So it's critical that we understand, the opportunities that lie within these numbers, So it's important that we take people on a digital journey. E-commerce grew in 2 years in 2020 by 600%, meaning people are taking digital services. Government through the COVID-19 pandemic has been forced to digitalize, but many people still can't access those digital services because either they can't afford the connectivity or they haven't got the devices in the palms of their hands that can access those services. So understanding what the issues are at really at a basic level and solving for those issues are critical.
Mm-hmm. And the issue of connectivity is one you have also touched on. I like the way that you spoke about satellite as an option for the undeserved areas. Can you elaborate for our viewers when it comes to satellite, how you see this being a very key component to try and close the gap between of digital divide that is?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the problems that we sometimes face as sectors is that we want to put connectivity into boxes, into like places where they belong, and it becomes a either or, So we look at either mobile technology as the single savior of the continent, or we talk about how do we achieve ubiquitous fiber connectivity, but there's a space for all connectivity methodologies to coexist. There's not going to be one single technology that's going to solve all of Africa's problems. So satellite has a place to play. There's some significant, movements that's happening in the space. The prices have come down, the speeds have gone up. So it's become a real contender, and it certainly has a very important place, in connectivity architecture going forward.
And you think the opportunities are there for companies to try and be involved more in satellite, provision of satellites? We know obviously of Elon Musk and other players who are coming in. Are there other opportunities for African players to be in that space?
I think time will tell. There are a lot of international players, that have got satellites already. Satellite connectivity is one of the oldest technologies, connectivity technologies that have been on the continent. The problem with satellite historically has been that it has been very expensive. It was quite slow, so like latency was a problem. Of course, like other things, like people are concerned about satellite for mission critical applications because the weather has an impact on satellite. But a lot of this has changed. There's been a lot of efficiencies introduced. There are a lot of local players. The extent to which Africa will take up its rightful place in this sector, I think, remains to be seen. But certainly, we've got a lot of rural communities, villages, and more people want to stay in the villages. Urbanization is a very, very big problem, but we can't also exclude them. So we need to find ways of including people. Deploying fiber to remote villages are incredibly expensive, so it's not, feasible. And mobile connectivity also, it's expensive to deploy cellular masts, to serve smaller rural communities. But satellite certainly has got a very, very big role to play in that.
Moving forward, recently I kind of engaged with some analysts who are predicting that data on the continent will quadruple probably in the next 5 years. Which brings us now to why we are here. The importance of data centers, cloud, and all those things. Can you maybe try and give us a role that cloud data centers will play in terms of managing Africa's growing data? For how significant is this infrastructure?
Incredible. I think, the evidence is, if you look at the amount of hyperscalers that are making a move on the continent, and including self-provisioning. If we look at, submarine cables, we spoke about it earlier this morning in the session, some of the self-provisioning that we're seeing from a submarine cable point of view, and then, of course, the build-out of data centers. And now we're predicting that, there's going to be a massive increase in edge data centers. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunities, financial opportunities, the opportunity to create jobs, which is, desperately needed on our continent. But of course, also, a lot of this hinges on access to skills. So critically important that we develop the skills base to then support and carry the momentum of this, developments forward.
One of the things I think which is common amongst the industry is the issue of how expensive to build out some of this digital infrastructure. And there are those that are advocating for infrastructure share. What's your view on that in terms of these companies sharing infrastructure to try and push Africa's digital agenda?
Of course, infrastructure sharing is phenomenal for achieving economies of scale. And we've seen it, South Africa, I always say, is the land of open access, So we've certainly learned how to democratize our infrastructure. The first open access fiber networks were built here, achieving, economies of scale and making it, the ROI much shorter, And of course, that's got other benefits as well. Dig one policies we've seen have, like favored open access providers. And similarly, we're hardly seeing mobile network operators own their towers. Most towers now sit in the hand of tower cos. Most recently, Vodacom carved their towers out, which is now hosted with Mast, which is the official name now of the new tower co. And I think that open access, provides a lot of opportunities, for us to leverage existing infrastructure, not having to duplicate infrastructure.
And you guys are doing really a lot of work on the continent to try and drive the Africa's digital agenda. And today you just released some very interesting stats and then the report that you shared with us for the first time. Can you probably maybe just briefly give us some highlights of some of the issues are those in that report and why will it guide us going forward?
I think some of the really interesting statistics are that we've just achieved more than 5 million fiber to the home connections. We're seeing a compound annual growth of 48% increase in uptake of services. So all around, a lot of really exciting things happening. A lot of the tower cos, showing that they are very excited about building out tower infrastructure and also using their tower infrastructure to provision antennas. And then we also saw that many announcements by data center companies who have announced substantial investment and further build out. I think some of the newer numbers that we're seeing, we initially thought that the GDP contribution by the sector is just over 2%, and we see that now that's closer to 6% contribution to GDP. So those are phenomenal indicators, that any government should take and pay serious attention to, and give some special attention to those markets that are showing this kind of growth from a sector point of view.
Yeah. And as you conclude, maybe for some that are not familiar with the kind of work that you do, can you just briefly maybe tell us what Digital Council Africa is all about and what you guys do? You have told us about this amazing stuff that you guys do, but some might not know exactly what you do. Sure. Can you just briefly maybe share with us?
Sure. We're an industry association. We're an advocacy group. We work with governments across the sub-Saharan African continent. And our role really is to help them with policy directions, to take their hand and work with them to find what policies work best for the deployment of infrastructure. Our core focus is on digital infrastructure. So we'll really look at fiber networks, at tower infrastructure, and both for tower cos and mobile network operators, and then, of course, to the data center and cloud space. And we believe that those three, if we can get that infrastructure right and correct, will accelerate the digital economy at large and create opportunities for the African continent. So key focus on policy directions, policy development, supporting governments, taking hands with them, and building a bridge between private sector and the need for government, understanding the rights and obligations of the parties, and helping them find that platform where they can connect and together build the digital economy of the future.
And how important do you think events like you are attending today are critical to shape the continent in the way you bring experts, where we bring the industry, everybody to come together and have a shared discussions?
Sam, you know what? I come from a sector where we always struggle with new terminology. We always come up with new words. And I think the word that describes the importance of these kinds of engagement has not been found yet. It is incredibly important to share the knowledge, to help accelerate investment, to bring all the companies onto the same page, to share ideas, to stand shoulder to shoulder and to have a clear understanding of what the challenges are, to discuss solutions to some of the problems that the sector face. I can tell you in the early days of the fiber sector in South Africa, there were very little, legislation, and some of it, wasn't being implemented, and the sector came together and they found their own solutions within the parameters of the law. And that is important, that, as a sector, we say we need to move forward. We need to, connect this continent. We need to move people to the cloud. And how do we do that? This is the platform where we create those dialogues and grow the sector.
In conclusion, Juanita, what are the near terms of Digital Council Africa? What should people expect from you you have produced a beautiful report. What more next? What's coming up here?
Sure, that's a tough question. I always say, just when we think that we're focusing on one thing, something else happens on the other side, and then we have to change focus and change direction. But I think, for us in the short term, we'd like to see a couple of policies. The data and cloud policy is critical. It's very important to the sector. And then, of course, we'd like to see the digital economy master plan, come to light. So that's also something that we believe is going to be important. Additional spectrum to be auctioned for the MNOs. So a couple of things that we think are important, where we will be either, working by ourselves or pushing behind some of our partners in the sector that lead some of those conversations. But I have to say, in the last year, government has done a lot around the policy environment. So we have seen, two very, very important policies, published this year. And, that will go a long way towards already accelerating the digital economy.
Thank you so much, Juanita, for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're so welcome, Sam. Thanks for having me.
For joining us at ITWeb TV. Please subscribe, to get more interviews like this. Thank you very much. Thank you.